be clear, the decision to provide aerial fires was a U.S. decision made within the U.S. chain of command. A hospital was mistakenly struck. We would never intentionally target a protected medical facility.
General John Campbell earlier today before the Senate Armed Services Committee calling the deadly airstrike that hit a hospital in Afghanistan a mistake. But the medical charity running that hospital, Doctors Without Borders, says the hospital was deliberately bombed. In a statement, Joanne Liu, the group's international president, said, quoting now, "Under international humanitarian law, hospitals in conflict zones are protected spaces. Until proven otherwise, the events of last Saturday amount to an inexcusable violation of this law." Close quote. Now, the organization is accusing the United States of a war crime and calling for an independent probe. For more, let's welcome back Pete Hoekstra, the Shillman Senior Fellow for the Investigative Project on Terrorism. And joining us now, former Defense Department spokesman J.D. Gordon of J.D. Gordon Communications. Both these gentlemen join us again from Newsmax, Washington. And again, our thanks to you both. J.D., first to you. Doctors Without Borders claims this is a war crime. Now, for our part, the U.S. says it fired only after receiving a direct request from the Afghan military. What's the real story?
Well, J.D., this is obviously a tragedy we can't afford to repeat. But you know what? I think it's very important to understand we're fighting a battle of ideas. And in that battle of ideas, our enemy is trying to attack our legitimacy. So if this group could say that it was intentional, they're going to do it. I know it was an accident. Obviously it was. The general testified it was. But there are our enemies who are trying to take us down by killing our legitimacy. So that's why we've got to resist that. We've got to do an investigation. We've got to do better, obviously, with intelligence from the Afghans. But you know what? J.D., at the end of the day, we've got to fight a battle of ideas, and that includes discarding nonsense allegations like that.
Pete, three investigations are underway right now. I'm just kind of curious. Are these investigations being conducted by our military, or is this someone internationally that may have an agenda counter to American national security and foreign policy?
Well, at this point in time, the only effective investigation will be an investigation done by the U.S. military. They're the only ones that are going to have all of the information. They're going to be able to, track the correspondence, the dialogue between the people on the ground and the people in the aircraft. The general was very clear today. He said the decision was made within the U.S. command structure. We've got all of that information. We can take a look at exactly what broke down here. Was it the input coming in? Is the process, is the process imperfect? Did that break down? So that's the only legitimate investigation going on. At some point in the future, if we have an independent investigation, which I'm always nervous about outside of the chain of command, outside of the military, Congress and DOD should be taking a look at it. Internationally, those groups many times are suspect.
Well, let's move to something else that's aroused suspicion in the United States, and that is increased Russian military activity in Syria. Pete, according to our own Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter, Moscow is pursuing a, quote, losing strategy in Syria. Do you share that assessment?
Well, it'd be interesting to see exactly what strategy he's comparing that to. Is he comparing that to America's strategy in Libya and Egypt and Syria and calling those winning strategies? We've got enough strategies in place in those parts of the world where we need to be very careful about calling someone else losing strategies. Putin and Russia know exactly what they want to do. They want to keep Assad in power. That is what they are focused on. I think saying that they're going to get caught in a quagmire and those types of things, I'm not sure that that's true at this point. They have a strategy. We don't.
J.D. Gordon, NATO says there was a second incursion by Russian planes into Turkish airspace. When you hear that, it brings a thought in the bigger picture of things. What is the risk of an accidental or deliberate provocation with all these planes from different air forces over Syria and the Russians violating Turkish airspace now?
JD, that risk is very high. Right now, we're not coordinating with the Russians, and so basically there is a great chance that there's going to be some inadvertent mishap there, whether it's them shooting down one of our aircraft or us shooting down one of theirs, or them getting into a confrontation with the Turks. That's very likely. You know, I think it's important to understand that Vladimir Putin, though, is playing the world like a fiddle. Basically, he's restoring the Soviet greatness in his mind, number one. He's protecting a client of his that buys billions of dollars in weapons. He's protecting Bashar al-Assad. And number three, he's also shifting the attention away from Ukraine, away from Georgia. Russia has occupations in those countries right now. He's got international sanctions that are very tough. So this is a cynical ploy by him getting involved to strike at what he calls terrorists in Syria, including moderate rebels who we're supporting. This is a cynical ploy by Vladimir Putin to get some sanctions relief from the international community over Ukraine. It's cynical, and we ought to call him out for it.
Well, with 30 seconds remaining, Pete, what will Russia do next? What do you expect?
Well, that's hard to say. I think what I would expect is that you will see an expansion of their ground presence, ground troops, and ground troops may actually who will be involved in the fighting, directing Syrian and perhaps Iranian troops to make sure that they are effective not only in the air but also on the ground.
We will have to leave it there. Pete Hoekstra and J.D. Gordon, both at Newsmax Washington. Gentlemen, will continue to keep an eye on this. Coming up, Joe Biden has a candidate in mind for the job he holds right now, but will she be interested? Our political panel will talk about that and more when Newsmax Prime continues, so stay with us.